Hey, we're going to look for a moment at the end of chapter 7 and take a thought from chapter 8. Just a brief thought. It won't take very long. But I want to begin this part of Hebrews by asking you if you ever have been required or asked to give up something in this life that's been very special to you. There's something very special, but you had to give it up because you found out there was something better you need to do or something different you had to do. And maybe if that doesn't ring any bells, have you ever had or been confronted with the idea that what you have always practiced or thought was probably not as right as you thought it was at the time, and now you have to change? Anybody ever had to do that? Or have you ever been taught maybe by your parents and maybe by your grandparents and maybe all through that lineage that you do things a certain way, only now you've kind of seen things a little differently and you have to do something totally differently? If you had any kind of experience like that, was it hard? Was it hard? And the interesting thing is, for some people, it becomes so hard or so difficult that they just say, no, I will not do it. I will not make the change. I don't care what you tell me. This is how I've been taught. This is how my parents did it. This is what I think is right based on what they say. And I don't care what you say. I will never, ever change. There are some people who do that. Well, normally in our speaking in the New Testament, we tend to look at Jewish people and we tend to look at them rather callously. By that I mean we don't have much good feelings for them because sometimes they're told the truth about maybe Jesus and they resist that. And they resist it strongly, and we tend to look at it and say, surely they can see that. Why don't they embrace that? It's clear as the hand in front of your face. That's what we say. And so we get aggravated with them because they won't make the change. Or we get aggravated with people who are near us, even in this life, because they won't make the change. Sometimes we get aggravated with siblings because they can't see it like we see it. Does any of that make any sense to you? Well, I'm telling you, if you really look at what the Jews have been called to do in the New Testament, it's about the hardest thing I've ever seen. And so the writer of the book of Hebrews has been going through this methodically, saying Jesus is better than angels, and he's even better than Abraham, and he's better than Moses, and he's better than Melchizedek. And maybe they can kind of think that through and think, well, yeah, maybe. But there is one thing in their life that they hold to more than any other thing. You know what it is? You do know what it is. Can you guess? Well, it's that old law. But the old law, it's not just that it has certain commands of hygiene and certain commands of what you eat and certain commands of what you touch and certain things you do on certain days. And that, it has these traditions tied into it. And remember, I told you about meeting the young woman a few years ago in a class in Washington, D.C., who told, her name was Tamar. Remember that story? And I said immediately to her, oh, you got an Old Testament name. And she said, I know, I'm named after the daughter of King David. And she said, my family's Jewish. I mean, we live, my parents live half a year in Israel. They live half a year in America. My brother lives now in Israel full time. And she said, we practice every single Jewish tradition, but we do not believe in God. So to them, it was a way of life. It was a system of way you do things that became so massively important that no matter how they felt about anything, they weren't going to give that up. It's the way our family's always done. It's the way we live. Well, that old law was embedded in them for generation after generation after generation, as far back as you could see. We look back to our history and see the Civil War and things like that far back. We're not talking about anything like that. We're talking about several hundreds of years. You see that? And now the writer of the book of Hebrews dares to say some things like this. For example, here's a verse in chapter 7, verse 18, I think it says, "The former regulation was set aside because it was weak and useless." Now, that old law was set aside because it was weak and useless. You know what some of us would do if you talked about what my parents taught me and my grandparents taught them and their grandparents taught them? You know what some people do if you said that was weak and useless? What might we do?
Come to blows over it.
Yeah, we would be ready to come to blows. I mean, that's something pretty important. In verse 22, because of this oath, Jesus has become the guarantee of a better covenant. That old law was covenant. That was God's promise. That was God's way. They were the special people. They were the chosen people. This is the way it is. We are Jews, and we're proud of this heritage. God chose us. He didn't choose the Amorites. He didn't choose the Amalekites. He didn't choose the Hittites. He chose us. We have all these traditions. And then you come to chapter 8. And I'm not reading, some of this gets in such detail, but I'm giving you the primary thought. Verse 6, "But the ministry Jesus has received is superior to theirs, as the covenant of which he is a mediator is superior to the old one. It's founded on better promises." How would you like to hear that kind of stuff? Well, he gave us a better covenant. It's so much superior to what you've known in the past. Do you think that you would receive that well? And he even quotes from the Old Testament, what they know. "The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah." That's all of Israel. "It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers when I took them by the hand and led them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant. I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I'll make with the house of Israel. After that time, declares the Lord, I will put my law in their minds. I'll write it on their hearts. I will be their God. They'll be my people." Then verse 13, the last one. "By calling this covenant new, he made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete is aging and will soon disappear." Don't you think that's hard? Don't you think that's hard? And yet some of these Jews will open-mindedly listen. And that's a big, big word. It's a word. Open-mindedly listen. Because you know what most of us have in some areas of our lives? Tunnel vision or closed-mindedness. That is exactly right. Some of us have closed-mindedness on some things. And when I mention those some things, whatever they might be, you tend to get very emotional. And as you get emotional, you start getting angry. And remember the law we've talked about over and over again, the principle? When your emotions go up, your intellect goes where? Down. Inverse proportionality. Always, always, always. When your emotions, your anger goes up, your intellect goes down. It's just the way it works. And yet, if you and I can possibly realize that the good news that Jesus brings is going to confront old in us over and over again. Now, that's just, you got to understand this. The good news that Jesus brings is going to confront in our lives, like it confronted their lives, the old that's in us. Always, always. It's going to call us to change. Everybody see that? And I don't know what it is in your life, and it may be different tomorrow in my life than it was yesterday, but I guarantee you, Jesus is going to call us to change something that we've always practiced. And we'll be confronted over and over again with the heart of sentimentality. Sentimentality means I have to hold on to that which is special in my past. Everybody got that? So I don't think it works in all areas of my life, but I made a conscious choice a few years ago that I now refuse to be sentimental about any single thing in my life. I refuse to be sentimental about anything. Because I think the more sentimental it is, the more it closes my mind to the bright future that God may have in store for me. And I may rob other people around me whom I love of being able to have more of what they might need because I'm stuck in the mud with my past that I'm holding on to. Does that make any sense to you at all? So I see people fight over this over here that seems so they're attached to it because that's grandpa's and so forth, and I'm thinking, how long are you going to live? And who's going to own grandpa's stuff then? You know. But it's not just that, it's other feelings that I might have along the way and other things I try to hold on because of whatever. If we're preaching correctly every single time we talk, it's likely that Jesus is going to confront something in our past that we need to turn loose of so that we can have a better relationship with him and with others. That's the way the New Testament works. It's calling us to change our lives.
It is like Solomon said in the end that all this doesn't matter.
Yeah. And you know what? I find myself wanting to have what Solomon had once in a while. I mean, this is the guy that said, anything my eyes wanted, I just got. Wow, what would that be like for a little while? I mean, that's really a good, cool deal for a little while. But he went down that pathway for quite a while and said, you know what I figured out? Just meaningless. Just totally meaningless.
The key phrase being a little while.
Yeah, a little while.
I mean, you can also understand, like, this is what, because sometimes you'll see, like, they were trying to kill Paul. They were trying to kill him. Like, God, like, calm down. Like, that's how deep they were into it.
That's a great point. Burke's bringing up a great point. Because of this kind of preaching that Paul did, that was requiring them to give up the past, they would rather not just fight to change, they would rather kill than change. Isn't that interesting? That's why they killed Jesus, by the way. Maybe the question is, what are we trying to kill so we don't have to change?